Yeah, I think we could start with that presentation, and if Oliver joins, then he can do it at the end of the panel because probably he has insights on that side as well. So, Aran, feel free to start the presentation whenever you consider.
Hey, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks Victor for having me. My name's Aran. I'm the co-founder CEO here at Archera. I'm also a former Amazonian, and I worked at Azure before that, so spent a whole bunch of time in my career in the cloud world, and founded Archera about 6 years ago to really bring a new type of primitive to the FinOps world, one that I viewed as really missing from the ecosystem of tools that I was building and shipping on the product side at Azure and at AWS, and one that I tried to pitch within the clouds and really because the finance teams have a very strict way of doing things, never got traction, which is this new way to de-risk commitments with really like a net new form of insurance, cloud commitment insurance, and how that helps customers avoid some of the key mistakes that I saw when I was, in my decade plus of work in the cloud, working with hundreds, probably thousands of really large end customers. So what I'm going to go through today is just a few common mistakes that I saw a lot of customers making around cloud commitments when I was at Azure doing things like launching, committed SQL Server instances there. And then even at AWS where I was launching SageMaker and seeing customers really start in 2016, 17, 18, go in for large GPU commitments, which are only more relevant now. There was really a common framework of mistakes that we would see customers make. I'm excited to go through those in some depth. But Archera is an Azure, AWS, and GCP partner. We offer this on all clouds. We're part of the Cloud Operations Competency Program within AWS and the well-architected program as well within AWS. So we're a consummate partner and often offer these services really in hand in hand with cloud reps on the AWS side and with many partners around the world. So diving into the material here. The number one mistake that I see customers constantly make, and I've seen this for over a decade in the cloud, is customers come in saying, hey, the cloud is great for R&D. I want to move fast. I want to spin things up, see if they work, shut them down, and that's great. But often customers spend far too long running in that experimental on-demand mode, even when their infrastructure and their usage starts stabilizing. So the number one mistake that we see customers make is waiting to commit until they have absolute confidence. And I'm an engineer. I know a lot of engineers get into the FinOps practice, and the thing that you want as an engineer is nines reliability. You want really high confidence. But unfortunately, when it comes to the world of cloud and building products and serving customers with cloud services, there is so much uncertainty that unless you are willing to accept that and make a commitment under that uncertainty, you're going to, one, be leaving money on the table, and two, you might never get to committing if you're looking for those nines of reliability that you're looking for in an engineered system in that long-term certainty of a service being up and running. So understanding a little bit about how customers think about saving money on the cloud, we really break it into two high-level buckets. The bucket on the left here in the graphic is what we call rate optimization. Now, this generally doesn't require engineers to have hands-on keyboard. This is done at the contract level. So if you've ever negotiated something like a private pricing agreement or a MAC at the really high end, or done something as simple as purchase a reserved instance or a savings plan, or more recently provisioned throughput units on some of the token-based services in the AI world. Those are all forms of a commitment, financial engineering or rate engineering that can help you lower the rates without having to go in and re-architect, rebuild your underlying systems. That's what's happening on the left-hand side here. On the right-hand side, we have more infrastructure impacting ways of actually optimizing your infrastructure and your cloud spend. And that includes things like right sizing, replatforming, terminating resources which are unused. And those are things where often you're going to need an engineer or a product team even that owns that infrastructure in the loop. And where Archera really focuses is on the left-hand side here. While we provide some visibility and integrate with a lot of tools and partners who work on the right-hand side here, our whole goal is to help customers really optimize with the native commitments, navigating all those different combinations, understanding the uncertainty of their actual usage, and then actually giving them a new tool in the tool belt in the form of commitment insurance, where if they don't use some of these commitments, we'll actually pay them back the difference to help customers really maximize what they can get out of the left-hand side here in terms of optimization. Now, if you look at what that insurance really looks like, this is sort of a simplified graphic to explain it, but in the AWS world, you really have three ways to buy. You can buy on demand. That's often where most customers start, running hour by hour, second by second, trying to figure out what is the right SKU here. How do these things work when you're building or migrating a new workload? And as you get more certainty, you can move into a fixed term 1 year commitment. So you're committing for 12 months. There's no getting out of that. That is like a fixed hourly bill that you're committing to for a certain instance or amount of spend. And then obviously, if you have really high certainty, you can go all the way out to a 3 year commitment. The problem is these commitments are fixed term. You're paying for them the whole time. There's not a lot of flexibility. And you are always essentially, even if there is, flexibility insofar as you can move instances, you're always committed to a fixed amount of spend that is often growing. That's what the clouds want. They want you to commit more and more dollars. What Archera does is it actually allows you to essentially break some of these commitments, break some of these leases, and get some flexibility. So we'll write you an insurance contract that says, hey, for let's say a 3 year commitment that you have, we'll write you an insurance contract that says after the first year, for the next 24 months, if this thing goes unused, if you end up migrating, if you end up using less through an optimization that you did on the hardware and infrastructure side, we'll actually credit you back, rebate you back all of the cash that is sitting there in an unused commitment. So you can reclaim that money in that budget year and actually redeploy it to something that's more useful than a piece of infrastructure that you migrated off of but committed to. And that really creates a net new primitive, something that instead of being fixed term is actually flexible term, and something that really helps customers have certainty that they're not going to be left if they commit with this, even if it's a 1% chance, with this fixed cost sitting there in their cloud bill that they can't get rid of. So it's really a new tool in the tool belt, and we view it as filling the gaps in the native commitments offered by AWS or Azure or Google, who all have very, very similar commitment offerings. And the most interesting thing about this is because we've been doing this for 6 years, we have a ton of data, and we have a free platform that you can install to actually get, a sense of what you can do with native commitments, what that insurance on top of it will help you do in addition. And all of that's free of charge. You can do your cost visibility, planning, automation of all different commitment types. Through that, we actually find opportunities where you might have uncertainty, you might have risk, but that's risk that we're happy to underwrite. And when you look at the net savings, net of the premium that you would have to pay for the insurance, often they can look not just attractive, but even better than the equivalent options from AWS. So looking here at the equivalent EC2 AWS commitments, you have 1 year savings plans, 1 year reserved instances. These are the average savings rates that you can get. If you look at our insured 30-day option, for example, you only have to commit for 30 days. The next 11 months, if the thing goes unused, you're getting a check back straight to your bank account for whatever that unused amount is. And the net savings of that, when it is used at 100%, net of all the premium that we would take out, is 30%. So better than a 1 year savings plan. Equivalently, when you look at something like the 1 year reserved instance on the AWS side, you're seeing that it's about a 35% savings rate. If you commit for a 1 year guaranteed reserved instance, where that first year is fixed, just like it is with the AWS instance, but those next 24 months, you have insurance on. So if you decide not to use that commitment and throw it away, we'll be crediting you back basically every month that unused amount in cash to your bank account. You're actually net saving 45%. So often customers find that by introducing this insurance, even when they have a fairly sophisticated commitment strategy already, because we're willing to take some of that risk that the business often isn't willing to take, or the engineering team isn't willing to take, we can help them get more aggressive and get much higher savings rates than they would otherwise through their kind of native commitment strategy. Additionally, the beautiful thing about the premiums that we charge, they're all billed through the cloud marketplaces. They count towards private pricing, MAC, EDP burn down. So it really does fit in well with the broader FinOps and cloud commitment strategies that are often in place with larger and more sophisticated customers. So the key thing is when you have a tool like this commitment insurance in the toolbox where you can commit for a term as short as 30 days, 1 month, which means that from a break-even perspective, you really only have to use that instance for the next 18 days before you're in the green and you've saved money net versus wasted money. It just doesn't make sense to wait to commit. You can optimize at any time based on, really not a long track record of historicals. You don't need to be using something for 6 months to commit for it. You can use it for as little as 1 month or even 3 weeks before we're willing to underwrite insurance on it. And that really helps you avoid some of that downside risk, that opportunity cost of not committing. Because the most pernicious thing is that people don't see the money they're wasting when they're not committing. But that is a counter that's constantly ticking up as you run on demand and aren't actually making the commitments to infrastructure that's likely going to be around for a good amount of time. And even if you don't think it is, when someone's offering you insurance and a guarantee that you'll either save money after, the first 18 days of this running, right? Or at worst, it'll be budget neutral. It's something that's really worth considering. The second major mistake that we see is that customers get dogmatic about saying, well, I'm only going to use this one type of commitment. I'm only going to use savings plans. I'm never going to look at RIs. I'm only going to use RIs. I'm never going to look at provisioned throughput units. And what we see is customers, because they narrow the field of view, really lock themselves into often a suboptimal strategy. And we don't just see that with customers. We see a lot of, vendors and consultants in the ecosystem do this as well, where they say, this is the only way to go. There's no reason to not do it otherwise. And they ignore a lot of the complexity and depth and breadth of options that the cloud providers give to you, particularly AWS, which has, the most mature and built out platform when it comes to different flavors of commitments. So talking about AWS commitments, you can see here that it goes far beyond savings plans. And even within savings plans, there is a variability. And within reserved instances, of course, there's a high degree of variability as well. So you have instance savings plans, which are very equivalent to standard reserved instances, with just the difference of operating system coverage. You have compute savings plans, which have pretty much the same savings rate as convertible reserved instances, but they don't have to be actively managed, and they essentially cover more services net. They cover things like serverless, et cetera. And then you have SageMaker savings plans, which cover those AI services from SageMaker. And then for a number of the database instances and offerings, as well as EC2, you have these reserved instances or reserved nodes, which are, very long-standing commitment types that have been around for over a decade. And I think many customers are used to using. All of these actually have their place in a holistic commitment strategy. And obviously, we believe they have their place alongside insurance, which we can write on top of any of these commitment types. It doesn't matter what the commitment is, be it one of these or a, private pricing agreement, we'll write an insurance quote against that. So what do we think is probably the optimal way to look at this field of different options that customers have? Well, looking at strategically combining those different options where it makes sense given your infrastructure is sort of the strategy that we recommend to customers going forward. And actually, if you use our free platform, we'll do all this planning and put together different strategies for you that you can evaluate free of cost, 5-minute read-only install. So definitely recommend, if you're saying, oh, I'm only going to click the button on compute savings plans, maybe looking at where, even without insurance, other commitment options in that basket could actually help you get to a more optimal outcome given your historical usage. And so when you look at this, you want to figure out, all right, what are the different things that under the exact AWS rules, which are constantly changing, these different commitments can cover? And what are the savings rates that I'm going to get out of that? Now, if you're partnering with a vendor to look at this, just make sure that vendor is giving you all the options. If they're only showing you options with convertible or reserved instances, or only showing you options with compute savings plans, it's incumbent on you to ask the right questions and say, well, can I see some other options? What about instance savings plans? What about standard RIs? It's really on you to ask those questions to make sure that you are seeing the breadth of options that the cloud provider really offers to you, and not, having your scope unnecessarily limited. And one of the things that we did in starting this company is really made it a priority to give a lot of that information out for free to customers. It's a free tool. You can play with it yourself. You can basically go to any line item and look at every single commitment option that can cover it. So all that complexity, if you want to dig deep, is there for you. But by default, we do recommend blended plans where we are looking at historicals and we are looking at all the different kinds of savings plans and reserved instances. And obviously, if you opt to include it, insured versions of those as well, that could make up a holistic strategy for a given piece of your infrastructure. And we do a lot of that, including the automation, for free if you want to kick the tires and see, where your strategy is today versus what an option B could look like. But otherwise, there's always spreadsheets and AWS simple pricing calculator. So, that's another way that I'm sure if you have the time and willpower, you can go that way as well. And then the third major mistake that we see is that a lot of customers focus on their biggest line item. They'll only focus on something like compute. But as I showed before, there's a wide range, and a growing range, actually, especially if you look at, Azure, where there is way more reservable services than AWS, where you can get a commitment to cover something that, maybe you weren't even thinking about. For example, we see a lot of customers using SageMaker and not understanding that, hey, there are SageMaker savings plans that you could use to even commit to a little bit of that. That is steady state, month over month or week over week. When we look at things like databases, especially, we see a lot of customers not covering or not committing to things like, DynamoDB or Redshift or RDS. Or Elasticache. And so really looking at all the different ways you can commit and save, I think, is one of the key things that customers often miss when they're looking to just look at their big line item, commit there, and then walk away. And so, again, you have this mix of reserved instances and savings plans. We can write insurance on top of any of them, and we often see that there's a lot more uncertainty around usage of databases, usage of SageMaker. And so those are places where, things like our 30-day commitments often help you bridge that gap between, oh, I'm not sure if I can commit for 1 year, but I know this is a committable service and I've been running it pretty consistently and I don't want to waste money. So that's a very key place that I think we see customers often miss when they're going through and planning their commitment strategies, particularly smaller and mid-sized customers. So again, don't just focus for your big production services, EC2 and RDS, when you're looking at commitments. Consider the whole long tail of services, because often when you add a lot of those up, those savings could be material. In fact, in many cases, we see them being as big, if not bigger, than, commitments to your production database on RDS. And so that's something, again, that a tool like Archera or other vendors that you're looking at, you should definitely ask them, all right, how many services are you covering? Do you cover every reservable service in this list? Or if you're working in the Azure ecosystem, do you cover this list? What's the other 30, 40, 50 services that are reservable within Azure? You really are looking for completeness there, so you can be sure that any given service where there is the option to rate optimize, you're able to go and one, plan it out, do some scenarios, figure out what the right options are for you, but two, and more importantly, include it into a broader commitment plan with, compute and database and AI, everything sort of rolled together, and not having to go service by service or having services missing and having to do those in the AWS console. Again, that leads to suboptimal outcomes versus having centralized plans with all services that could be used under a given team's umbrella or a given company's umbrella all in one place. And then the last thing that I think is important, especially with the rise of things like Bedrock and AI and a lot more R&D spend that has, often much more uncertainty than we saw with R&D spend of the past, where someone was standing up a new API endpoint versus committing to a big token-based service like Bedrock, is really understanding the right combination of native commitments versus insured commitments in the case of Archera, where You want to understand what steady state, what should I commit to with the cloud provider, and what has a little bit more risk around it, what has a little bit more volatility, and I should be seeking out something like an insured contract there so I can get the savings, but also hedge the downside risk if, DeepSeek comes out and surpasses Claude and I have to migrate, for example. So that's again a very key consideration that we see customers missing and that we recommend as part of our standard kind of free onboarding and analysis process customers really consider. And then the last kind of set of commitment mistakes here really start with this automation idea. Once you have the strategy, once you've considered all the options and the range of different ways that you can commit to the given services you're using, as well as, potentially even insurance on top of it with a vendor like Archera, actually automating that process, especially for things like fast-growing production segments of your infrastructure, and doing that maybe too early is another problem that we see customers often fall into, which again is kind of a one-way door. And so a lot of customers that have gone upside down on their commitments, they're paying for a bunch of committed usage that they didn't end up using, and obviously they didn't talk to our share before, so they didn't have insurance on it. We often see customers coming to us saying, "All right, I don't want to do this again. How can you help me?" And so often it stems from an early automation of a strategy that may not have been the right strategy long term for the customer. So we really think about four key questions that customers have to ask before they click a button and say, automate this whole process for me. You need to understand, what are the cost and usage and what's the granularity at which you can break it out by, what we call segments. What is the granularity at which you can break it out into COGS and R&D for different teams? And then how can you model those forward such that hey, for the next 3 months, this is going to be a pretty consistent, growth lever. We're going to onboard a new customer over the next 3 months in this segment. So every machine that comes over, we know the customer's on a 1-year contract and we should be committing to it, for example. So really understanding those granular forecasts for different pieces of your infrastructure is the first thing. Or don't have to be super granular all the way out to 3 years, but you should understand at least a quarter out. And then you have to understand what is the cadence of the renewals that the commitments you're committing to sort of imply. So if you're committing all up front at the beginning of the year and then have one big renewal at the end of the year, it actually leads you with less flexibility, insured or not, than actually committing a little bit throughout the year, what we call laddering, where you have things constantly renewing, which means you constantly have the ability to either not renew that commit or renew up when that commit comes through, giving you a lot more flexibility than having just one gigantic renewal for all of your commitments at one point in the year. And then really looking at the next layer, you have to understand how customized can I actually make the automation? Obviously, if you build an automation script yourself, you can customize it to your heart's content, but the reliability might be a little shaky. Many vendors say, hey, it's a black box. We're going to do this for you. It's our way over the highway. Really, what you're looking for is often something in the middle. You don't want a black box because they don't know your infrastructure as good as you. So having someone else automate it without a lot of this granular information is, especially in this black box way, is often a recipe for disaster. And we see customers come to us with, completely upside down on their commitments because they handed it over to a third party. They messed up in a number of ways, and AWS didn't really go and correct the issue for them, leaving them in a pretty bad place. We've seen actually more and more of that over the last few years. So really understanding what are the granular customizations that you can put on the automation policy. Can you use all the different commitment types as part of the automation policy? Those are things that you're really looking for when you're considering what is the actual tactical way we are automating. And then the last piece is understanding, the risk management. So what happens if things go bad? What happens if this customer churns the contract that I've been purchasing, commitments against? So those are really things that require you to often bridge the gap with your finance stakeholders and understand, look, what does it look like when this fixed cost is sitting on the books? Because I'm automating this now and we're going to be purchasing, every hour or every day to meet the new workloads that are coming in. Now, obviously, something like Archera with its insurance helps answer that question. But even if you don't have that, you should be quantifying what is that downside risk and understanding, with automation, is that a risk that that's worth accepting for you? And then really it rounds out to automate only when you're comfortable, right? You should be purchasing plans by hand, manually, seeing how they perform for different pieces of your infrastructure while you're kind of getting a handle on modeling and forecasting. And you really need to be getting confidence in whatever tools you're using before you take the leap of faith to flip a switch and say, all right, cool, I'm going to put this on automate only mode. Even if you're running at scale and you're having to go in like every other day to go and do the manual purchasing, it's worth doing that just to gain that comfort level, which is really important before you should go and click the automate button and really walk through that one-way door, so to speak. And the last commitment mistake here that we see is often customers are thinking that it's a smart thing to do to hedge risk by instead of going from on-demand to 3-year for usage, particularly usage that could be covered by something like a savings plan, which is very flexible. They're often buying 1-year commitments and using that as a way to hedge the risk or split the difference. What we see is that 1-year commitments actually often aren't that worth it. And it's the reason why we have such attractive savings rates that we can give to customers by ensuring 3-year commitments with a 1-year term, such that those last 24 months on that 3-year term are flexible, where we can actually give cash back to the customer if it's unused. So our 1-year insured commitments often are, and actually always have a much higher savings rate than their native alternative within AWS. You don't have to renew those for another term. They just continue saving you money if you use them past that 1-year term. And on top of that, when you're really thinking about it, it's the equivalent commitment that's sitting there because even if you stop using it on day 366, we're paying for those next 24 months. So it's really not sitting on your balance sheet necessarily. And so when we think about advising customers through this, we often say, look, maybe that first commitment purchase, go for the 1-year, you're going to feel more comfortable with it. But as you gain that confidence, and I know 3 years is much longer than 1 year, it is worth considering going longer term, even if you don't have insurance, but especially with insurance, it just makes it a no-brainer to push out the term length and really increase the savings rate that you can get out of essentially providing that additional certainty with some of that downside protection in theory that we can provide. And then the last thing that we see here is delaying your enterprise commitment, so PPAs and EDPs. And this is another place where, just like with reserved instances and savings plans, we can help with insurance, but really also help with the planning and execution with a lot of our free tooling. So a PPA or an EDP within AWS is where generally you're spending kind of $1 million plus a year. And in exchange for a top level commitment to a total amount of spend over 2 to 5 years with AWS, you are going to get a blanket discount across all services. Now, this requires a much higher degree of long-term forecasting than committing to an individual reserved instance or savings plan. But often getting on one of these private pricing agreements is incredibly attractive from a savings perspective because unlike a reserved instance or savings plan that only applies to one type of service, the blanket discount from a private pricing agreement applies to all services. And often there are services that don't have native commitments that anyone can buy in the console that you can get special pricing on by going through a private pricing agreement and committing in a private way to those services. So often once customers get to that scale of $1 million plus a year of annual spend on AWS, the biggest opportunity cost that they are incurring and money they're leaving on the table in the commitments domain is by not signing or not exploring those PPA options and working with their Amazon rep to get something across the table there where they can lock in a fairly attractive discount across the entire AWS bill and very specific services if they are power users of certain services like CloudWatch, for example. So where Archera can help there is again with our free service. Not only do we help with commitment planning for our reserved instances and savings plans and automation of those and cost visibility on top of that to really help through that forecasting, planning, and execution process. But using those tools and a specific tool that we've built for private pricing agreement forecasting and planning. We can help you for free do your demand plan and figure out what is the number that makes sense to put in front of my AWS rep to commit to. What are the different scenarios here that would make sense without having to go and spend, 2 to 4 days in spreadsheets figuring it all out yourself? You can plug in 5-minute read-only install and generate these forecasts and scenarios right out of the gate. On top of that, what we help customers do is often AWS will not accept these private pricing agreements if you're not increasing how many dollars you're spending in year 2 and year 3. And often, again, just like with 3-year commitments, customers are uncomfortable with that. So that is a place where Archera can come in and offer to quote some insurance such that, let's say you are committed to spend $1 million in year 1 and they want you to spend 1.25 million in year 2 to secure that discount. Well, maybe that 250K you're not so certain about. That's a place where we can come in, write a contract, say, go commit to that. The premium's going to be less than what you save by committing to this private pricing agreement. And if anything goes wrong, we'll cover essentially that marginal $250,000 of unused commit if you overcommit on your private pricing agreement. And on the back end, what we can do there is if customers are over, even if you're not a customer of Archera on the insurance side today, and you're over your skis on your PPA, we can go in and actually help with some shortfall prevention. So if you are, let's say at $1 million PPA and you're in October and you've only spent, say, 700,000 and you're not going to make the difference, we can help in those 3 months make up as much of the difference as possible to minimize that true up, even if you're not a insurance customer of ours. That's a completely free service that we offer. So again, it doesn't matter what the commitment type is, from reserved instance, savings plan, provisioned throughput units, all the way through to max and private pricing agreements. Archera has both free tools and this opt-in insurance that can really help you get the most out of these programs. So again, as soon as you're able to, especially given the free tooling that firms like Archera could offer, as well as some of these insurance options, as soon as you're able to take advantage of it, we recommend starting to think about, build the forecast for, and start the conversations around a private pricing agreement with your cloud provider. Again, a really low effort way on the engineering side to get a high degree of savings across a really broad swath of services. So the call to action here is very simple, as I've been saying throughout the call. If you are looking at revamping your commitment strategy, reevaluating your commitment strategy, if you're in a PPA and you're over your skis, if you're thinking about a private pricing agreement, or just if you're starting your journey on AWS, migrating and spinning up new infrastructure and trying to get that first commitment to move off of all on demand, these are all places where Archera can help. And we have a free platform. You never have to talk to a human. I'm an engineer. I would never want to talk to a human, but you can if you want to. You can schedule a demo there, but we have a free platform on the AWS Marketplace. It's read only. Click a button. Looks like a native app that you install. And you can start with free cost optimization, free commitment management of all native commitments, and start to get some of those insurance quotes to see how you can maybe get more aggressive with things like reserved instances, savings plans, and private pricing. If you want to talk to a human about this, you can, of course, schedule a demo there. But I would highly recommend, if you are in one of those states as a customer, checking this out. Otherwise, we have a lot of great material that we release online on our website. So another great place where you can really read up more on some of the depth of optionality that AWS or Azure or Google gives you around things like private pricing agreements, reserved instances, and savings plans, and all the nuances around how those are applied, how the rules are set, and how they've been changing, and where Archera can help, or where you, as an individual user, can go and make smarter decisions on a go-forward basis around these AWS commitments. Awesome.
Okay, that was great, Aran. Thanks for the good presentation, and welcome, Oliver and Nilofar. So now we are going to start the panel discussion, and I see that you are also answering the questions there. There is only the if Archer is in the Azure Marketplace, and yes, it is. And so they are asking, and before we start with the panel, it's an additional one that they say like, yeah, so if I bought a 3-year savings plans and 2/3 of it is unused, you'll keep crediting back for the 2/3 until the contract ends. And they say, yes, those Victor Garcia are not me. I am the only presenter, so you can. We are going to answer all the questions at the end of the panel. So now we are going to start with the paneling, and then after that we are going to have the talk of Oliver. So we are going to have a short discussion now, and then we go with the talk. So first I want to ask about the mistakes that we are seeing. I think one of the most interesting one is the automation part, because we are seeing that it could be a problem if done bad, I think, because you, let's say, scale a wrong process. But I also think that automation is something that you should be doing as soon as you have it clear to be applying to, right? So maybe Nilofar, we can start with you about what do you think about the automation process in the commitment matter, and how you have, work with it or envision it.
Yeah, to be honest, Victor, that's a really good point. And while Aran was presenting, that's something that I actually noted it down, that starting automation too early is a mistake, in my opinion. I think we are all engineers, we are all tech nerds, and we really want to automate anything and everything we can, right? I want to automate my milk order with a smart fridge and get it delivered to myself, right? It's too early sometimes. We still need to find a good balance. We need to understand what's the value we will be bringing to our business. The other good point what Aran mentioned here was on the customer churn side, right? If you're automating it too early, committing it too early, if your business changes, if your market changes, you'll be actually making some losses instead of making profits. So my opinion, my personal, my professional expertise I would definitely go for waiting for it for the right amount of time. Again, who would decide what's as soon as possible or what's the right amount of time, right? That's kind of depends on your business. That depends on the circumstances you are in. And a lot of things changes, right? For example, I think any external factor could affect your businesses as well. So at that time, automating it, but still in a more human way, would be much more better rather than just be super excited about automation and going full in. I would rather say that take your time, understand the requirement, and then go and automate it in a small scales.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I don't know if Oliver, do you have anything to add on the automation part? I'm sure you have seen like a lot of stuff.
I do. I must admit that I do not 100% agree with this perspective. I do believe that automations is a way moving forward for basically for everything. So if you look at the way we engineer things, we have DevOps, let's say. What do they do the first week? They start scaffolding things and they want to run a CI/CD pipeline. Why? Because it just drives creativity. It's not going to produce any errors, and you will have the maximum productivity and security that things will run forward. Now, I do understand you might be careful, but the carefulness comes from, do I understand how automation works? And if it works to the right way and it does function the way it was tested for, then hands down, no human being will do a formula better than a machine. That's just given science. It's pure. So I believe the way I speak to my customers typically, we try to put, and this is not really just related to rates. Rates is one thing, of course, it's one of many pillars. But in general, the more you automate things and remove the human factor, the more reliability and consistency. And in that case, the more savings you produce. The least, I don't think human beings will be smarter in the way they calculate things. There's no way. An Excel sheet will never give you a better result than a machine. That's not going to happen. That's why people spend time doing this. So my view for automations, go for it, but at least understand how it works. It's not that you will go blindly on any sort of commercialism, but rather if you understand how that works, then hands down, go for it actually early on if you just understand what it does. That's my view.
Yeah, I think it's Yeah.
I think that was kind of my point. I actually agree with that, Oliver. It's about the crawl, walk, run. The problem is customers always go to the run, and maybe that's fine if you're testing out like in a dev test environment, Kubernetes scheduling automation, but you can't go to the run with commitments because it's a one-way door. So we say go for the crawl and walk, and then the run is automate. Hopefully, customers listen to us and don't automate right away and then find themselves upside down.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it depends what you're automating, right? So it's easier to automate DevOps pipeline and stuff. But when I agree what you said, that if you're automating commitments, it's a one-way door. If you're automating it, then you're committed for like a year or 3 years. You don't want to go down that road too early. So, I mean, definitely automate it, but still more in a human fashion.
Yeah, and I also wanted to point out the second part. One of the part that was not being able to, or not taking into account all the services in all the providers, and especially in AWS, that have commitment available, because we are super used to, let's say, relate commitments to RDS and to EC2, and that's it. And people tend to forget from other services, such as the options that Fargate does, or you can apply the savings plan to land and so on. So I think that is something that people tend to forget, because when I got into engagements related to commitment, it was only focused on full on EC2 and nothing else, and nothing goes to the picture. So what are your thoughts about that? Like, do you see it frequently that they are people are super focusing to EC2, and then the other services are ignored? I don't know, Oliver.
So I like the point that Aran mentioned earlier. There is no point of buying just one sort of commitments. So it would be dumb if you would just rely on one service and one way of doing things. Of course, that's why you have more flexibility, and that needs a lot of planning. Probably in the talk that I'm just about to give, this point I have to touch here as well, because when it comes to planning, you have to think about what do you need in terms of, I will have to cover that with reservations, that one was convertible reservations, that one was saving plans. And probably that's the easiest way to think about it. It's not one way, one thing. You have to diverse. It's just like spending the way you also invest your money. You don't put it all in one basket, right? You have to think about security versus amount of savings, amount of flexibility that you need, and you have to diversify your portfolio when it comes to that. Even the way you buy it, you have to think about where you buy it, right? So certain things you can buy them right in the subscription level or the account level, while other things you have to buy it in the shared level. All these things require plenty of planning. So there's the problem with trades that often people do not understand the full scope of how that really works. You need to have a good understanding before you start clicking the first button to commit to things. And therefore you have to have at least a little bit of an understanding how it works, where to buy things, and how to which services I should cover with what, and then go for it.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts on that, Nilofar? I'm curious about seeing also your perspective on that matter.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's a good strategy. That's generally I've seen a lot of organization going for. It's never a good idea just to go for one sort of commitment, just go buy savings plans blindly, not incorporate any RIs. That wouldn't be the best dollar value return you're getting for your commitment. Also, when you're going for chargeback model, it's really important to understand that which accounts which accounts you are covering for your commitments, right? So and which are on demand. When you just buy in your master account, sometimes it becomes challenging to go for appropriate chargeback models. It requires a lot of work from FinOps team to create these chargeback policies for different business units. So yeah, I mean, it's a complicated thing. It's not sort of one answer, one formula that would fit everybody, right? But the general standard option, I would say that go for first RIs, convertible RIs, and then there are some other workloads, for example, Lambdas or something which you are not able to cover with RIs, top it up with the savings plans.
Okay. Yep. That's a good one. I think you introduced an interesting point on the chargeback system that is always something that it expands when dealing with commitments. And moving on one of the topics that I think it's a bit, well, let's say large perspective, or one of the topics that you only deal with once there is a large organization in place, is the PPA EDP agreements. Those are super important because they tend to expand when there is a lot of money in place. So you're probably, in my experience, I haven't dealt with that like in first person view, but I don't know if maybe you, Nilofar, had dealt with that, or what is your experience related to PPA or EDPs?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, and I think that actually brings a good blanket savings. It's not that only your compute or your databases would be covered by PP or EDP. The good point is that any of your cloud spend would be covered by EDP discount. So even though the discount percentage, as in the number value, you might not find it quite high. It depends. It varies from, I mean, I've seen in my experience between 5 to 25%, sometimes even a little bit on the north of 25% as well. But still, the savings you get, the dollar value savings you get out of this sort of commitment is much more higher than you would get out of your compute savings plans or your IDS RIs and stuff like that, because this commitment would cover all of your spending. So be it CloudWatch, be it CloudTrail, be it any other AWS services, all of them would be covered with this PPA. Sometimes you get better rate on your storage commitments, right? Depending on the sort of business you are in. So you can negotiate better price, and you can get better discount on the data transfer fees if you are transferring a lot of inter-region data, right? So in my opinion, that's a very good savings potential for any organization.
Okay. And Oliver, what have you seen with your experience related to this PPA or EDPs?
So one of the points that I would like to discuss short in my talk is how to measure your wins. I've seen the discussions about ESR, or effective saving rates, to be very effective, because simply you have to check all the options. So one option is, I'm buying a commitment, but I'm using only half of it and I'm getting losses in it, right? Perhaps now with our discussion with Aran, you might even have a better win on that one, because now we have a little bit more security perhaps, and this would raise the amount of savings you will do eventually. While in different terms, sometimes literally not even buying a commitment, just going blind on demand and just use more automated shutdowns would even be a better option than buying commitment at all. So my simple take on this is, don't follow the commercial system of telling you you're saving big money if you buy this commitment or that one and just fall into it blindly. Try to always have a metric of calculation. What would be my options? If I take option A and I calculated it and I see that in 1 year I will be saving 50%. Option B is with a commitment I'm saving maybe 10%. Without a commitment I'm actually saving 15% if I just do different measures. Then don't even go for a commitment, but you need to measure it the proper way. And that's what probably many people do not get in the right context, because they rely on false matrices such as coverage and utilization. I hope I will cover this point as well in the upcoming talk. But my point is, I would like to utilize whatever discounts you might get, if it makes sense to your usage, to have the maximum amount of savings. So commitments do not always alone give you the highest savings. You might look for different options, like enterprise agreements or whatever it is. Even with on demand, it might still be higher than your commitment if you can measure it properly.
That's great, and I think it's a good insight. So if you want, you can start preparing your presentation. I think it's a good moment, because you have mentioned several topics, and I don't think the audience deserves to wait more to have your content. And then after that presentation, we are going to have a final Q&A and the final discussion, so we can gather the thoughts of what Oliver has prepared for us. So stay tuned to get all the insights, and we are going to answer all your questions regarding the commitment process that also we have discussed now. and what we are going to be discussing now with Oliver. So let me know if you need anything on my side. I assume you can share. Okay, now it's sharing. Yeah. Okay, great. We are seeing. You are muted, Oliver, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay, good deal.
So once again, apologies about the scramble that happened earlier with Zoom. I couldn't come on time, but I hope now I can just present the few cents that I wanted to present earlier. And I thought about the topic, the 72% that you never saved. So usually you get into many commercials from the industry, but it's not exactly what it seems. So excuse me, I just need to. So what happens is people usually go to the cloud vendor and ask for a good discount, and they promise you things like they promise you 72% discount on your commitment if you commit for 3 years. So this usually happens when people panic and they go into rush buying. So how true is really the 72% they promised for? Well, if it's AWS or Azure, this claim is true. Fact is, you can just check it now, 72, 73% you will save in either one of these clouds. In fact, Google offer the same thing. And they tell you exactly where and for how long. So 36 months being committed in Azure will give you a 72% discount, same in AWS. But reality is what they're giving you is they're giving you this kind of a voucher. They tell you half price if you buy this drink. That's what the cloud vendor tells you, AWS, Azure, or whatever it is. But what they do not tell you in reality is what they're offering you is a catalog of discounts. And that means if I go to the same bar and I get the same drink for Sunday, Monday, all the way through Saturday, I'll get half price. But you really have to buy every day the drink in order to get 50% discount. So here's my question. What if you end up using only 2 of the vouchers from the 7 that you got in your catalog? Are you really saving 50%? Well, just the simple math, it's not going to work out. If you paid regular price, you might pay $1 per drink. You would have paid $2. If you had the voucher for 3.5, you already made losses. So does that relate really one-to-one to cloud services? Of course. So here's an example. Can you really make losses in ROIs despite 72% discount? Yes, that's a real calculation, depending on the 72 discount that we spoke about. It has to be paid up front, 3 years. And you will have a billing month of $168 for that commitment. You're saving the hourly rate is $0.2. If you run the same instance on demand, but you have shut it down throughout the week and you just run it for regular 40 weeks hour that you might need it for, your hourly rate is much higher. Again, it's 72% more expensive, but the monthly bill turned out to be 13% cheaper. So yes, it's proven that sometimes on demand can be cheaper than RIs in that case. So obviously, basically, there are many traps that you can fall into buying commitments, and this is what we want to avoid throughout the next few minutes. So how not to fall into the commitment trap, and that's what I would like to discuss with you. So number one, I touched on it briefly, but I would like to speak about it now more in depth, measuring it. How do you measure your actual savings and to see if it will be valuable to buy a commitment or not? And I like this expression, if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. It's a simple fact. If people buy commitments and they cannot measure that they really materialize those savings, then they have been fooling themselves. They did not improve anything. They just bought what the commercial told them. So the industry standard tells you what we all know. If you do any kind of discussions about commitments, they tell you, well, your utilization is high, your coverage is high, then you're good. That's a fact. Is that really the case? So let me just rephrase quickly, what is actual coverage and utilization, just to be on the same line. So if I try to use the same analogy for drinks. If you get the voucher for your favorite bar and they tell you get 4 drinks, and if you went to that bar and you bought 4 drinks, then you're covered, right? That's 100% coverage. That's basically what coverage is. If you bought on the other side 5 drinks, you have only 80% coverage. You just had 4 out of 5 being paid for with that discount. And that's what the coverage is. What about utilization? Well, the same analogy. You got 4 drinks for free or half price. If you went to the bar and you actually got 5 of them, you're still, sorry, that's utilization, that's the wrong one. Your utilization would have been still 100%. Why is that the case? Because I got 4 out of 4. I still got all what I could use in that voucher. In the same case, if I just bought 1 bottle, you actually wasted the full potential of having 4 bottles for half price. So your utilization in that case was just 25%. So why am I saying that? Because if people use coverage as an indicator for high rate savings, that's not always the case. Think about your coverage. If you had the first example in the same environment, you have 4 running, let's say EC2 instances. You had the coverage 100% in the first case, but you had more, basically more reservations than needed. You would have paid more money rather than having just 75% coverage. So coverage is not the best indicator for having savings. Likewise, utilization. If you have utilization with 100%, but less coverage in that case, it will be more expensive than 80% utilization with higher coverage. And that means, again, utilization as itself is not a full indication of high savings. And this is just simple formulas that I presented here. So obviously, the dashboard and what it tells you about how much you've been saving in terms of utilization and coverage is not leading you to anywhere good. It's just basic, simple metrics, but they're not telling you that you really saved. So does that mean use your brain? Well, in the simple case, I would say, yeah, but you know what? Let me raise the coverage and the utilization, and this will be a very good formula. And that would be the case, of course, if you are running all the time, 24/7, your instances or whatever you're using. But if that's the case, then I tell you, my friend, your problem is not rates. Your problem is you're using the cloud itself the wrong way. You should think about elasticity. You should think about switching off. And in that case, it will mess up anyway this formula that we spoke about. Why? Because now we have, for every time you switch off your machines with elasticity, you will have different utilization. That means now the coverage and utilization formula have been messed up. So which line should you pick? Should you still cover 100%? Will that yield the highest saving? Should you cover 75%, 60%? Well, it turned out there is a simpler way of doing it. And for this, I would like to go back again to the same analogy of making drinks. If you would go to the supermarket and they get 2 offers, buy 3 bottles, you get 2 free, or buy 2 bottles, get 1 free, which one do you think would be the higher saving for you? Can you decide on the spot? Can you just take a moment to think about it? Well, it turned out there's a simple mathematical equation, and this is what ESR, effective saving rate, is. Effective saving rate is a formula which is documented well in the FinOps Foundation. ProsperOps is another product. They have a similar formula, and I just find it really simple. It's basically calculate what you would have spent, including the discounts that you got. So calculate everything that you would pay and materialize after you have got the discount, divided by the equivalent on demand. And in that case, if you would have had, again, the same example with 5 drinks, I would get 5 drinks for the price of 3. That's 3 over 5. That's 40% effective saving rate. If I would get 3 drinks for the price of 2, that's 2 over 3. That's a 33% effective saving rate. So 40% is definitely better. Why did I bother you with this? Because the same formula works when you want to accurately calculate what you're saving. And that brings me to the same topic what I spoke about earlier. You could be utilizing just simple on-demand sometimes. You could be utilizing different kinds of discounts that you get, not just reservations and saving plans, and still calculate what would be with or without it. What if I have only 30 hours of on-demand versus 168 on-demand versus 576? And this is really a calculation I try to do in reality to see the output. And if we calculate in each case, like in the first case, if we take the 30 hours and calculate how much is it per week, plus everything on rest on demand, divided by everything that I would have gotten if I would have just purely used on demand, how much would it have been? And it turned out that this high coverage yield to -1 saving rate, that means you're actually running losses in this case. Calculating the same for all the 3 ones that we've seen, we realized that different coverages might lead to different ESRs, and the one in the middle was the highest in this case. So why do I want to tell you? Because now you can go and spot them in a simple graph and see what would be the highest savings. Am I getting it through on-demand mixture with different saving rates that I would get through different combinations of saving plans and RIs and on-demand and switch off? Yes, maybe. If you could plot this out, you will find the highest possibility to make your savings. And this should be the way to see what is the best strategy to move forward. So I spoke briefly now about how to measure it. Let's just talk about planning it, because that's another fact that I see often. If you see this simple picture that also represents a company where they have different kinds of things running on their cloud. And obviously this pink sheep, what I called here, was not fitting to your commitment. So it's messing things up. So why is that the case? Because simply people sometimes do not govern before they start committing. And by governance is try to eliminate anything that you don't use regularly. So upfront, put your planning to have a way of choosing the same kind of instances and compute power that you need in an aligned way, because it will help you to save more in rates if you have similar patterns. It will help you to build a sort of plan. If you have random things running, then it will be more and more difficult to plan that. So if we have this, we can now finally isolate the similar ones on the side, and the ones we have irregularly, put it on the other side, just ignore it. Another thing with planning is think about same patterns, but think about exchanging RIs, or think about if I can buy the same family, then it will be used in different ways. And this convertible RIs would fit well. So again, think always in advance, plan in advance before you commit on what kind of usage you should have. Moving to the same thing, I will take the same pattern that my colleague spoke about earlier. When it comes to ramping up things, ramp up slowly. Don't buy big commitments. Buy really tiny commitments and add up to it on time to have more and more smaller commitments rather than big ones. And that's what we know again as laddering. He spoke about it earlier. And if you gradually and slowly add up, you'll make sure that you do not exceed the demand of what you need in terms of commitments, and thus have higher savings. So planning includes also a lot more. So where do you want to buy your commitments is another question. Should I buy it in a pair account? Should I buy it in the linked account? When should I buy it? Buy it too early and you're making losses. Buy it too late and you make losses either. So it's very essential to think about when should I buy it? What should I buy? Again, it was a good question that was raised earlier. Should I just buy RIs? Should I have a combination of RIs and saving plans? Should I have convertible ones? And the question is always to have a basket of different things. It would be the best option going forward. And last but not least, how much to buy. And for that, you need, again, a very good metric that helps you to choose how much you should buy. And in that case, we would say ESR is a very good metric for that moving forward. So now we spoke about 2 points: measure it, plan it, finally automate it. And that is, again, where we started the conversation earlier. And I think there are plenty of things that we've seen already what needs automation. If it's choosing ESRs, if you need an automation to have a heat map of what kind of resources I should use more regularly and govern it, you should need some sort of automations when it comes to laddering. These things cannot simply be done with a human calculation and having someone doing it in an Excel file. It doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. It's really not going to be efficient. Try to choose automations whenever possible. So what I find really surprising that often people spend lots of money on tools that help you to optimize usage. But often what they forget is you can actually make more savings on rates than usage. So why don't you invest a little bit more in getting the right solution to optimize your rates and in an automated fashion that will help you also to grow faster. That being said, again, consider the platforms and solutions that you have. We spoke about different solutions even today, and it would be wise to think about the landscape of what is out there and how to use your best options moving for automations and buying commitments. So let me summarize. Let me wrap it up quickly. So how not to fall into the commitment trap: measure it properly using ESR, plan it well before you buy it, and finally automate it whenever possible. And if that's the case, you will make sure that you do not fall into this trap. My name is Oliver. I am a professional certified FinOps certified professional. I'm also a trainer, and I work in PwC Switzerland. Here's my details. I also blog a lot about FinOps. It's Recloud FinOps, or recfo.blog. That's my blog. Please visit it, subscribe to it if you're not already. And that being said, I'm very happy to take any questions. If you have any further questions about commitments and how to help you with, I'm more than happy. I'm there in the community very often. Very happy to hear from you and to exchange with you when possible. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it was a great presentation, Oliver. So hope that everyone that was joining will see it on the recording as well. I love your style of the presentation. So everyone that joined and everyone that registered will get the link to the slides, so everyone can take a look at that. And I think a lot of insights were shared on that. I also believe that it's a very tricky matter, like commitments in general and the coverage and how you measure the success of this program, since there is a tricky little things and a lot of money is in place to be able to make it correctly. So Nilofar, I want to get your insights about what was said by Oliver, especially I think the topic of utilization, coverage, and elasticity. I know you are very into the elasticity concept, so please share with us what do you think about this.
Yeah, it's all brilliant. Thank you, Oliver. It's really good content, really good insights. Yeah. One thing I would say that probably I would start measuring how much I need before I start any commitment or before I understand what sort of discount I want to go for. So to answer your question that which discount is better, right? That whether buy 3 and get 2 free or buy 2 and get 1 free. So it depends. If I need 5 bottles, I would go for buy 3 and get 2 free. So I would probably first go for defining what I need and then work it out from there. To see what is the best discount possible for our requirement, right? And the other thing I would add is the ESR formula. If we are not considering elasticity, if we are not considering the other discounts we get from vendors and all, then are we measuring it right? Because there are some vendors who actually give discounts outside of the commitment rate. So you might get some 30% discount on your commitment, but you're already getting like 20% on your PPA, on your EDPs, on your MCAs, stuff like that. So if you consider that add elasticity, then is ESR actually the right metric to monitor? That sort of questions I would have. Again, that depends. We'll have to actually work on the numbers and stuff to get the right answer. But I published something around this, and in fact, this afternoon I published something around elasticity to measure that. Okay, what's the best way to measure your productivity in cloud? So I would rather consider all that rather than using ESR as a sole metric.
Yeah, and I think that's because it gets complex, and you, depending on the reference and the let's call it the metric that you refer to, you seem successful or you don't, and you need to make you need to be aware that you are getting the most out of cloud, and you need to evolve the metrics and the references that you use to be able to be successful, right? And I think one of the topics, it's what Oliver said about automation, and it was previously shared, and I think the automation part in commitments is crucial for making, especially for large scales companies. Like for small ones, maybe you can make some adjustments, and I have even seen like scripts that are crazy to calculate the reservation and all the commitment stuff. But the automation, and especially I've seen also the usage of ML, of machine learning for forecasting usage and being able to estimate what the commitment will be for following years, because after all we need to see that, and sometimes you see that the changes in the demand and the changes in the maybe applying FinOps and reducing the consumption because you are making it more efficient, then it could probably affect your commitment strategy. So it's something that you also need to be taken into account. I don't know, Oliver, if you have seen like the usage of ML in this topic, or how do you see like the changes and the forecasting stuff of commitment is, I think, one of the most difficult topics.
Yeah. So yes, I've really seen tons of automations in different kinds of platforms that they use for FinOps. And honestly, sometimes it's really overrated. So still, especially when it comes to forecasting, I mean, unless you put business demands, you cannot really tell what will be forecasted, right? It's never going to be something that you can bite on. ML and AI and all of this would give you really nice estimations if nothing changed. But as soon as you have different business demands coming up, then everything bursts. But I'm thinking more about automations also, especially in terms of commitments, because again, these simple things that we spoke about today, you cannot really, even governing what you use on your cloud environments, like just choosing what to use and to put some rules to enforce that people do not use random things. For example, that's one way where automations is really essential. Other things like just calculating how much I should buy. I think, yes, intelligence will help a lot in this, especially if you have some ML and AI in it. It will do help you because they see patterns as well in your usage. But as well, when it comes to buying it, especially for laddering, I don't see a way around buying laddering commitments in a click base. It's not going to work. You need automations for that. There is no way around it. Automations is the only possibility to ladder commitments. The reason is because you buy millions of them and it's very small steps, incremental steps. So how do you want to do this? Buying it with manual way, again, it doesn't function. So this is where automations will be essential, and it will use the intelligence that people built into it, if it's machine learning, if it's AI, and it will help you in that case. That's what's the whole point behind it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if you, Nilofar, have some insights on the automation or the ML part. I think because the first time I saw the ML applied to it, I was like, yeah, this actually makes sense for forecasting, because it's one of the better topics that the ML works for, but it's still a risk to let it to the ML to decide, right?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Would you let AI govern your wallet, right? I mean, that's sort of the thing. So are we too early on this? Or are we being too excited about automation? I mean, automate it, but take your time. I mean, you don't have to rush it, because I don't know, how do you incorporate customer churn? How do you incorporate new business coming in, stuff like that? You still need some sort of human factor, rather than automating everything. I would love it personally, but I don't think we are that mature yet, or I don't think there's like a tool or a way to automate it that would solve all our problem. I guess it's just finding that right balance, and I'm a bit cautious on that side. That's again that's my way of working.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be cautious, and especially because you are dealing with a lot of budget and a lot of part of the cost, and it's for me it's super interesting, the commitment topics, because I always see that it's crucial. It's one of the most important things, especially for large scale clients or customers, organizations, that you need to master it as soon as possible, because let's say the considerable expense, even though you make FinOps and you make cost optimization and you'll be able to reduce, if you want to become more efficient, you'll still want to spend a lot in your IT, and especially on cloud. So you still need to manage commitment, because that's not going to, let's say, get away of your topic. So I think it's something that, especially large scales organizations need to master, and people that are lower scale should start learning through, because if you probably move to or your company grows, you need to be able to control it. Or if you change your job and you go to a bigger like organization, you probably need to handle that. So I think we are way over the hour, but it's always good to be way over the hour in these webinars. I think it was very interesting, and I hope people got a lot of insights. And so if anyone has any questions, now is the time, because it's going to be the last minutes of the webinar. So anyone has any questions related to commitments. So thanks for that. And yeah, Nilofar and Oliver and Aran had to go earlier, but because of a flight. But it was a pleasure to have you both on the call, and I think it was super insightful. So thanks for that.
Thank you very much for hosting us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.